The Enormous Crocodile by Roald Dahl. In the biggest, brownest, muddiest river in Africa, two crocodiles lay with their heads just above the water. One of the crocodiles was enormous. The other was not so big. "Do you know what I would like for my lunch today?" the enormous crocodile asked. "No," the not-so-big one said. "What?" The enormous crocodile grinned, showing hundreds of sharp white teeth. "For my lunch today," he said, "I would like a nice, juicy little child." "I never eat children," the not-so-big one said. "Only fish." "Ho, ho, ho!" cried the enormous crocodile. "I'll bet if you saw a fat, juicy little child paddling in the water over there at this very moment, you'd gulp him up in one gollop." "No, I wouldn't," the not-so-big one said. "Children are too tough and chewy. They're tough and chewy and nasty and bitter." "Tough and chewy?" cried the enormous crocodile. "Nasty and bitter? What awful tommy rot you talk. They are juicy and yummy." "They taste so bitter," the not-so-big one said. "You have to cover them with sugar before you can eat them." "Children are bigger than fish," said the enormous crocodile. "You get bigger helpings." "You are greedy," the not-so-big one said. "You're the greediest croc in the whole river." "I'm the bravest croc in the whole river," said the enormous crocodile. "I'm the only one who dares to leave the water and go through the jungle to the town to look for little children to eat." "You've only done that once," snorted the not-so-big one. "And what happened then? They all saw you coming and ran away." "Ah, but today when I go, they won't see me at all," said the enormous crocodile. "Of course they'll see you," the not-so-big one said. "You're so enormous and ugly, they'll see you from miles away." The enormous crocodile grinned again, and his terrible sharp teeth sparkled like knives in the sun. "Nobody will see me," he said, "because this time I've thought up secret plans and clever tricks." "Clever tricks?" cried the not-so-big one. "You've never done anything clever in your life. You're the stupidest croc on the whole river." "I'm the cleverest croc on the whole river," the enormous crocodile answered. "For my lunch today, I shall feast upon a fat, juicy little child, while you lie here in the river feeling hungry. Goodbye." The enormous crocodile swam to the side of the river and crawled out of the water. A gigantic creature was standing in the slimy, oozy mud on the riverbank. It was Humpy Rumpy the hippopotamus. "Hello, hello," said Humpy Rumpy. "Where on earth are you off to at this time of day?" "I have secret plans and clever tricks," said the crocodile. "Oh dear," said Humpy Rumpy. "I'll bet you're going to do something horrid." The enormous crocodile grinned at Humpy Rumpy and said, "I'm going to fill my hungry, empty tummy with something yummy, 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 yummy." "What's so yummy?" asked Humpy Rumpy. "Try to guess," said the crocodile. "It's something that walks on two legs." "You don't mean," said Humpy Rumpy, "you don't really mean you're going to eat a little child?" "Of course I am," said the crocodile. "Oh, you horrid, greedy, grumptious brute!" cried Humpy Rumpy. "I hope you get caught and cooked and turned into crocodile soup." The enormous crocodile laughed out loud at Humpy Rumpy. Then he waddled off into the jungle. Inside the jungle, he met Trunky, the elephant. Trunky was nibbling leaves from the top of a tall tree, and he didn't notice the crocodile at first. so the crocodile bit him on the leg.
Ow!
Said Trunky in his big, deep voice.
Who did that? Oh, it's you, is it, you beastly crocodile? Why don't you go back to the big brown muddy river where you belong?
I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile.
You mean you've nasty plans and nasty tricks, said Trunky. You've never done a nice thing in your life.
The enormous crocodile grinned up at Trunky and said, I'm off to find a yummy child for lunch. Keep listening and you'll hear the bones go crunch.
Oh, you wicked, beastly beast, cried Trunky. Oh, you foul and filthy fiend. I hope you get squashed and squished and squizzled and boiled up into crocodile stew.
The enormous crocodile laughed out loud and disappeared into the thick jungle. A bit further on, he met Mugglewump the monkey. Mugglewump was sitting in a tree eating nuts. Hello, Crocky, said Mugglewump. What are you up to now? I have secret plans and clever tricks, said the crocodile. Would you like some nuts? Asked Mugglewump. I have better things to eat than nuts, sniffed the crocodile. I didn't think there was anything better than nuts, said Mugglewump. Aha, said the enormous crocodile. The sort of things that I'm going to eat have fingers, toenails, arms and legs and feet. Mugglewump went pale and began to shake all over. You aren't really going to gobble up a little child, are you? He said. Of course I am, said the crocodile. Clothes and all. They taste better with the clothes on. Oh, you horrid, hoggish croc, cried Mugglewump. You slimy creature. I hope the buttons and buckles all stick in your throat and choke you to death. The crocodile grinned up at Mugglewump and said, I eat monkeys too. And quick as a flash, with one bite of his huge jaws, he bit through the tree that Mugglewump was sitting in, and down it came. But just in time, Mugglewump jumped into the next tree and swung away through the branches. A bit further on, the enormous crocodile met the roly-poly bird. The roly-poly bird was building a nest in an orange tree. Hello there, enormous crocodile, sang the roly-poly bird. We don't often see you up here in the jungle. Ah, said the crocodile, I have secret plans and clever tricks. I hope it's not something nasty, sang the roly-poly bird. Nasty? Cried the crocodile. Of course it's not nasty. It's delicious. It's luscious. It's super. It's muscious. It's duper. It's better than rotten old fish. You mash it and munch it. You chew it and crunch it. It's lovely to hear it go squish. It must be berries, sang the roly-poly bird. Berries are my favourite food in the world. Is it raspberries, perhaps? Or could it be strawberries? The enormous crocodile laughed so much his teeth rattled together like pennies in a money box. Crocodiles don't eat berries, he said. We eat little boys and girls. And sometimes we eat roly-poly birds as well. Very quickly, the crocodile reached up and snapped his jaws at the roly-poly bird. He just missed the bird, but he managed to catch hold of the long, beautiful feathers in its tail. The roly-poly bird gave a shriek of terror and shot straight up into the air, leaving its tail feathers behind in the enormous crocodile's mouth. At last, the enormous crocodile came out of the other side of the jungle into the sunshine. He could see the town not far away.
Ho, ho, he said, talking aloud to himself. Aha! That walk through the jungle has made me hungrier than ever. One child isn't going to be nearly enough for me today. I won't be full up until I've eaten at least 3 juicy little children. He started to creep forward towards the town. The enormous crocodile crept over to a place where there were a lot of coconut trees. He knew that children from the town often came here looking for coconuts. The trees were too tall for them to climb, but there were always some coconuts on the ground that had fallen down. The enormous crocodile quickly collected all the coconuts that were lying on the ground. He also gathered together several fallen branches. Now for clever trick number 1, he whispered to himself. It won't be long before I am eating the first part of my lunch. He took all the coconut branches and held them between his teeth. He grasped the coconuts in his front paws. Then he stood straight up in the air, balancing himself on his tail. He arranged the branches and the coconuts so cleverly that he now looked exactly like a small coconut tree standing among the big coconut trees. Soon, 2 children came along. They were brother and sister. The boy was called Toto. His sister was called Mary. They walked around looking for fallen coconuts, but they couldn't find any because the enormous crocodile had gathered them all up. "Oh, look!" cried Toto. "That tree over there is much smaller than the others, and it's full of coconuts. I think I could climb that one quite easily if you help me up the first bit." Toto and Mary ran towards what they thought was the small coconut tree. The enormous crocodile peered through the branches, watching them as they came closer and closer. He licked his lips. He began to dribble with excitement. Suddenly, there was a tremendous whooshing noise. It was Humpy Rumpy the hippopotamus. He came crashing and snorting out of the jungle. His head was down low, and he was galloping at a terrific speed. "Look out, Toto!" shouted Humpy Rumpy. "Look out, Mary! That's not a coconut tree. It's the enormous crocodile, and he wants to eat you up." Humpy Rumpy charged straight at the enormous crocodile. He caught him with his giant head and sent him tumbling and skidding over the ground. "Owie!" cried the crocodile. "Help! Stop! Where am I?" Toto and Mary ran back to the town as fast as they could. But crocodiles are tough. It is difficult for even a hippopotamus to hurt them. The enormous crocodile picked himself up and crept towards the place where the children's playground was. "Now for clever trick number 2, he said to himself. "This one is certain to work." There were no children in the playground at that moment. They were all in school. The enormous crocodile found a large piece of wood and placed it in the middle of the playground. Then he lay across the piece of wood and tucked in his feet so that he looked almost exactly like a seesaw. When school was over, the children all came running onto the playground. "Oh, look!" they cried. "We've got a new seesaw!" They all crowded round, shouting with excitement. "Bags, I have the first go. I'll get on the other end. I want to go first. So do I. So do I." Then a girl who was older than the others said, "It's rather a funny, knobbly sort of a seesaw, isn't it? Do you think it'll be safe to sit on?" "Of course it will," the others said. "It looks strong as anything." The enormous crocodile opened one eye just a tiny bit and watched the children who were crowding around him.
Soon, he thought, one of them is going to sit on my head. Then I will give a jerk and a snap, and after that it will be yum, yum, yum. At that moment, there was a flash of brown, and something jumped into the playground and hopped up onto the top of the swings. It was Mugglewump the monkey. "Run!" Mugglewump shouted to the children. "All of you, run, run, run! That's not a seesaw. It's the enormous crocodile, and he wants to eat you up." The children screamed and ran for their lives. Mugglewump disappeared back into the jungle, and the enormous crocodile was left all alone in the playground. He cursed the monkey and waddled back into the bushes to hide. "I'm getting hungrier and hungrier," he said. "I shall have to eat at least 4 children now before I'm full up." The enormous crocodile crept around the edge of the town, taking great care not to be seen. He came to a place where they were getting ready to have a fair. There were slides and swings and dodgem cars and people selling popcorn and candy floss. There was also a big roundabout. The roundabout had marvelous wooden creatures for the children to ride on. There were white horses and lions and tigers and mermaids with fishes' tails and fearsome dragons with red tongues sticking out of their mouths. "Now for clever trick number 3, said the enormous crocodile, licking his lips. When no one was looking, he crept up onto the roundabout and put himself between a wooden lion and a fearsome dragon. He sat up a bit on his back legs and he kept very still. He looked exactly like a wooden crocodile on the roundabout. Soon, all sorts of children came flocking into the fair. Several of them ran towards the roundabout. They were very excited. "I'm going to ride on a dragon," cried one. "I'm going on a lovely white horse," cried another. "I'm going on a lion," cried a third one. And one little girl, whose name was Jill, said, "I'm going to ride on that funny old wooden crocodile." The enormous crocodile kept very still, but he could see the little girl coming towards him. "Yummy, yummy, yum," he thought. "I'll gulp her up easily in one gollop." Suddenly, there was a swish and a swoosh, and something came swishing and swooshing out of the sky. It was the roly-poly bird. He flew round and round the roundabout, singing, "Look out, Jill! Look out! Look out! Don't ride on that crocodile!" Jill stopped and looked up. "That's not a wooden crocodile," sang the roly-poly bird. "It's a real one! It's the enormous crocodile from the river, and he wants to eat you up!" Jill turned and ran. So did all the other children. Even the man who was working the roundabout jumped off it and ran away as fast as he could. The enormous crocodile cursed the roly-poly bird and waddled back into the bushes to hide. "I'm so hungry now," he said to himself. "I could eat 6 children before I'm full up." Just outside the town, there was a pretty little field with trees and bushes all round it. This was called the picnic place. There were several wooden tables and long benches, and people were allowed to go there and have a picnic at any time. The enormous crocodile crept over to the picnic place. There was no one in sight. "Now for clever trick number 4, he whispered to himself. He picked a lovely bunch of flowers and arranged it on one of the tables. From the same table, he took away one of the benches and hid it in the bushes. Then he put himself in the place where the bench had been. By tucking his head under his chest and by twisting his tail out of sight, he made himself look very much like a long wooden bench with 4 legs. Soon, 2 boys and 2 girls came along carrying baskets of food. They were all from one family, and their mother had said they could go out and have a picnic together. "Which table shall we sit at?" said one. "Let's take the table with the lovely flowers on it," said another. The enormous crocodile kept as quiet as a mouse. "I shall eat them all," he said to himself. "They will come and sit on my back, and I will swizzle my head around quickly, and after that it'll be squish, crunch, gollop." Suddenly, a big, deep voice from the jungle shouted, "Stand back, children! Stand back! Stand back!" The children stopped and stared at the place where the voice was coming from. Then, with a crashing of branches, Trunky the elephant came rushing out of the jungle. "That's not a bench you are going to sit on," he bellowed. "It's the enormous crocodile, and he wants to eat you all up." Trunky trotted over to the spot where the enormous crocodile was standing, and quick as a flash, he wrapped his trunk around the crocodile's tail and hoisted him up into the air. "Hey, let me go!" yelled the enormous crocodile, who was now dangling upside down. "Let me go! Let me go!" "No," Trunky said, "I will not let you go. We've all had quite enough of your clever tricks." Trunky began to swing the crocodile round and round in the air. At first, he swung him slowly. Then he swung him faster and faster and faster and faster still. Soon the enormous crocodile was just a blurry circle going round and round Trunky's head. Suddenly, Trunky let go of the crocodile's tail, and the crocodile went shooting high up into the sky like a huge green rocket. Up and up he went, higher and higher, faster and faster. He was going so fast and so high that soon the earth was just a tiny dot miles below. He whizzed on and on. He whizzed far into space. He whizzed past the moon. He whizzed past stars and planets, until at last, with the most tremendous bang, the enormous crocodile crashed head first into the hot, hot sun, and he was sizzled up like a sausage.
Roald Dahl's Revolting Rhyme.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When little Snow White's mother died, the king, her father, up and cried,
"Oh, what a nuisance, what a life. Now I must find another wife."
It's never easy for a king to find himself that sort of thing. He wrote to every magazine and said,
"I'm looking for a queen."
At least 10,000 girls replied and begged to be the royal bride. The king said with a shifty smile,
"I'd like to give each one a trial."
However, in the end, he chose a lady called Miss Maclehose, who brought along a curious toy that seemed to give her endless joy. This was a mirror framed in brass, a magic, talking, looking glass. Ask it something day or night, it always got the answer right. For instance, if you were to say, "Oh, mirror, what's for lunch today?" the thing would answer in a trice,
"Today it's scrambled eggs and rice."
Now, every day, week in, week out, the spoiled and stupid queen would shout, "Oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered every time,
Oh, madam, you're the queen sublime. You are the only one to charm us. Queen, you are the cat's pyjamas.
For 10 whole years, the silly queen repeated this absurd routine. Then suddenly, one awful day, she heard the magic mirror say,
From now on, Queen, you're number 2. Snow White is prettier than you.
The queen went absolutely wild. She yelled, "I'm going to scrag that child! I'll cook her flaming goose! I'll skin her! I'll have her rotten guts for dinner!" She called the huntsman to her study. She shouted at him, "Listen, buddy, you drag that filthy girl outside and see you take her for a ride. Thereafter slit her ribs apart and bring me back her bleeding heart." The huntsman dragged the lovely child deep, deep into the forest wild. Fearing the worst, poor Snow White spake. She cried, "Oh, please give me a break." The knife was poised, the arm was strong. She cried again, "I've done no wrong." The huntsman's heart began to flutter. It melted like a pound of butter. He murmured,
Okay, beat it, kid.
and you can bet your life she did. Later, the huntsman made a stop within the local butcher's shop, and there he bought, for safety's sake, a bullock's heart and one nice steak.
Oh, Majesty, oh, Queen.
He cried,
That rotten little girl has died, and just to prove I didn't cheat, I brought along these bits of meat.
The Queen cried out, "Bravissimo! I trust you killed her nice and slow." Then, this is the disgusting part, the Queen sat down and ate the heart. I only hope she cooked it well. Boiled heart can be as tough as hell. While all of this was going on, oh where had Snow White gone? She'd found it easy, being pretty, to hitch a ride into the city, and there she'd got a job unpaid as general cook and parlour maid with 7 funny little men, each one not more than 3'10", ex-horse race jockeys, all of them. These 7 dwarfs, though awfully nice, were guilty of one shocking vice. They squandered all of their resources at the racetrack backing horses. When they hadn't backed a winner, none of them got any dinner. One evening, Snow White said, "Look here, I think I've got a great idea. Just leave it all to me, OK? And no more gambling till I say." That very night, at eventide, young Snow White hitched another ride, and then, when it was very late, she slipped in through the palace gate. The king was in his counting-house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlour, eating bread and honey. The footman and the servants slept, so no one saw her as she crept on tiptoe through the mighty hall and grabbed the mirror off the wall. As soon as she had got it home, she told the senior dwarf, or gnome, to ask it what he wished to know. "Go on," she shouted, "have a go." He said,
Oh, mirror, please don't joke. Each one of us is stony broke. Which horse will win tomorrow's race, the Ascot Gold Cup steeplechase?
The mirror whispered, sweet and low.
The horse's name is Mistletoe.
The dwarfs went absolutely daft. They kissed young Snow White fore and aft, then rushed away to raise some dough with which to back old Mistletoe. They pawned their watches, sold the car, they borrowed money near and far. For much of it they had to thank the manager of Barclays Bank. They went to Ascot, and of course for once they backed the winning horse. Thereafter, every single day, the mirror made the bookies pay. Each dwarf and Snow White got a share, and each was soon a millionaire, which shows that gambling's not a sin, provided that you always win.
Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack's mother said,
"We're stony broke. Go out and find some wealthy bloke who'll buy our cow. Just say she's sound and worth at least £100, but don't you dare to let him know that she's as old as Billy-O."
Jack led the old brown cow away and came back later in the day and said,
"Oh, Mumsy dear, guess what your clever little boy has got? I really don't know how, a super trade-in for our cow."
The mother said,
"You little creep, I'll bet you sold her much too cheap."
when Jack produced one lousy bean. His startled mother, turning green, leaped high into the air and cried,
I'm absolutely stupefied. You crazy boy, do you really mean you sold our Daisy for a bean?
She snatched the bean. She yelled,
You chump!
and flung it on the rubbish dump. Then, summoning up all her power, she beat the boy for half an hour, using, and nothing could be meaner, the handle of a vacuum cleaner. At 10 p.m. or thereabout, the little bean began to sprout. By morning, it had grown so tall you couldn't see the top at all. Young Jack cried.
Mum, admit it now. It's better than a rotten cow.
The mother said,
You lunatic! Where are the beans that I can pick? There's not one bean. It's bare as bare.
No, no,
cried Jack.
you look up there. Look very high, and you'll behold each single leaf is solid gold.
By gollykins, the boy was right. Now, glistening in the morning light, the mother actually perceives a mass of lovely golden leaves. She yells out loud,
My scented souls! I'll sell them, Minnie, buy her rolls. Don't stand and gape, you little clot. Get up there quick and grab the lot.
Jack was nimble, Jack was keen. He scrambled up the mighty bean. Up, up he went without a stop, but just as he was near the top, a ghastly, frightening thing occurred. Not far above his head he heard a big, deep voice, a rumbling thing that made the very heavens ring. It shouted loud, Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Jack was frightened. Jack was quick. And down he climbed in half a tick.
Oh, Mum,
He gasped.
believe you me, there's something nasty up her tree. I saw him, Mum. My gizzard froze. A giant with a clever nose.
A clever nose?
His mother hissed.
You must be going round the twist.
He smelled me out, I swear it, Mum. He said he smelled an Englishman.
The mother said,
And well he might. I've told you every single night to take a bath because you smell, but would you do it? Would you, hell? You even make your mother shrink because of your unholy stink.
Jack answered,
Well, if you're so clean, why don't you climb the crazy bean?
The mother cried.
By gad, I will. There's life within the old dog still.
She hitched her skirts above her knee and disappeared right up the tree. Now, would the giant smell his mum? Jack listened for the fee-fo-fum. He gazed aloft. He wondered when the dreaded words would come. And then, from somewhere high above the ground, there came a frightful crunching sound. He heard the giant mutter twice, By gosh, that tasted very nice. Although, and this in grumpy tones, I wish there weren't so many bones.
By Christopher,
Jack cried.
by gum, the giant's eaten up my mum. He smelled her out. She's in his belly. I had a hunch that she was smelly.
Jack stood there gazing longingly upon the huge and golden tree. He muttered softly,
Golly gosh, I guess I'll have to take a wash if I'm going to climb this tree without the giant smelling me. In fact, a bath's my only hope.
He rushed indoors and grabbed the soap. He scrubbed his body everywhere. He even washed and rinsed his hair. He did his teeth, he blew his nose, and went out smelling like a rose. Once more he climbed the mighty bean. The giant sat there, gross, obscene, muttering through his vicious teeth, while Jack sat tensely just beneath, muttering loud, Fee-fi-fo-fum. Right now I can't smell anyone. Jack waited till the giant slept. Then out along the boughs he crept and gathered so much gold I swear he was an instant millionaire.
A bath
He said,
does seem to pay. I'm going to have one every day. Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf. As soon as Wolf began to feel that he would like a decent meal, he went and knocked on Grandma's door. When Grandma opened it, she saw the sharp white teeth, the horrid grin, and Wolfie said,
May I come in?
Poor Grandmama was terrified.
He's going to eat me up.
She cried, and she was absolutely right. He ate her up in one big bite. But Grandmama was small and tough, and Wolfie wailed,
That's not enough. I haven't yet begun to feel that I have had a decent meal.
He ran around the kitchen yelping,
I got to have another helping.
then added with a frightful leer,
I'm therefore going to wait right here till little Miss Red Riding Hood comes home from walking in the wood.
He quickly put on Grandma's clothes. Of course, he hadn't eaten those. He dressed himself in coat and hat. He put on shoes, and after that he even brushed and curled his hair, then sat himself in Grandma's chair. In came the little girl in red. She stopped. She stared. And then she said, "What great big ears you have, Grandma,"
All the better to hear you with.
the wolf replied. "What great big eyes you have, Grandma," said Little Red Riding Hood.
All the better to see you with.
The wolf replied. He sat there watching her and smiled. He thought,
I'm going to eat this child. Compared with her old grandmama, she's going to taste like caviar.
Then Little Red Riding Hood said, "But Grandma, what a lovely great big furry coat you have on,"
That's wrong!
cried Wolf.
Have you forgot to tell me what big teeth I've got? Ah, well, no matter what you say, I'm going to eat you anyway.
The small girl smiles. One eyelid flickers. She whips a pistol from her knickers. She aims it at the creature's head, and bang, 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 she shoots him dead. A few weeks later, in the wood, I came across Miss Riding Hood. But what a change! No cloak of red, no silly hood upon her head. She said, "Hello, and do please note my lovely furry wolf-skin coat."
The Three Little Pigs. The animal I really dig above all others is the pig. Pigs are noble, pigs are clever, pigs are courteous. However, now and then, to break this rule, one meets a pig who is a fool. What, for example, would you say if strolling through the woods one day, right there in front of you, you saw a pig who'd built his house of straw? The wolf who saw it licked his lips and said, "That pig has had his chips. Little pig, let me come in.
No, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin.
Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." The little pig began to pray, but Wolfie blew his house away. He shouted, "Bacon, pork, and ham! Oh, what a lucky wolf I am!" And though he ate the pig quite fast, he carefully kept the tail till last. Wolf wandered on, a trifle bloated. Surprise, surprise, for soon he noted another little house for pigs, and this one had been built of twigs. Little pig, let me come in.
No, by the hairs on my chinny chin chin.
Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. The wolf said, "Okay, here we go." Then he began to blow and blow. The little pig began to squeal. He cried,
Oh, Wolf, you've had one meal. Why can't we talk and make a deal?
The wolf replied, "Not on your Nelly." And soon the pig was in his belly. "Two juicy little pigs," Wolf cried. "But still I am not satisfied. I know full well my tummy's bulging, but oh, how I adore indulging." So, creeping quietly as a mouse, the wolf approached another house. A house which also had inside a little piggy trying to hide. But this one, piggy number 3, was bright and brainy as could be. No straw for him, no twigs or sticks. This pig had built his house of bricks.
You'll not get me.
The piggy cried. "I'll blow you down," the wolf replied.
You'll need
Pig said.
a lot of puff, and I don't think you've got enough.
Wolf huffed and puffed and blew. The house stayed up as good as new. "If I can't blow it down," Wolf said, "I'll have to blow it up instead. I'll come back in the dead of night and blow it up with dynamite." Pig cried.
You brute, I might have known.
Then picking up the telephone, he dialed as quickly as he could the number of Red Riding Hood.
"Hello?
She said.
Who's speaking? Who? Oh, hello, Piggy. How do you do?"
Pig cried.
I need your help, Miss Hood. Oh, help me, please. Do you think you could?
"I'll try, of course.
Miss Hood replied.
What's on your mind?"
A wolf.
Pig cried.
I know you've dealt with wolves before, and now I've got one at my door.
"My darling pig,
she said.
My sweet, that's something really up my street. I've just begun to wash my hair, but when it's dry, I'll be right there.
A short while later, through the wood, came striding brave Miss Riding Hood. The wolf stood there, his eyes ablaze and yellowish like mayonnaise. His teeth were sharp, his gums were raw, and spit was dripping from his jaw. Once more the maiden's eyelid flickers. She draws the pistol from her knickers. Once more she hits the vital spot and kills him with a single shot. Pig, peeping through the window, stood and yelled,
Well done, Miss Riding Hood!
Ah, Piglet, you must never trust young ladies from the upper crust. For now Miss Riding Hood, one notes, not only has 2 wolfskin coats, but when she goes from place to place, she has a pigskin travelling case.
Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This famous, wicked little tale should never have been put on sale. It is a mystery to me why loving parents cannot see that this is actually a book about a brazen little crook. Had I the chance, I wouldn't fail to clap young Goldilocks in jail. Now, just imagine how you'd feel if you had cooked a lovely meal, delicious porridge, steaming hot, fresh coffee in the coffee pot, with maybe toast and marmalade, the table beautifully laid, one place for you and one for Dad, another for your little lad. Then Dad cries,
Golly gosh, gee whiz, oh, cripes, how hot this porridge is. Let's take a walk along the street until it's cool enough to eat.
He adds,
An early morning stroll is good for people, on the whole. It makes your appetite improve. It also helps your bowels to move.
no proper wife would dare to question such a sensible suggestion, above all not at breakfast time, when men are seldom at their prime. No sooner are you down the road than Goldilocks, that little toad, that nosy, thieving little louse, comes sneaking in your empty house. She looks around. She quickly notes 3 bowls brimful of porridge oats, and while still standing on her feet, she grabs a spoon and starts to eat. I say again, how would you feel if you had made this lovely meal and some delinquent little tot broke in and gobbled up the lot? But wait, that's not the worst of it. Now comes the most distressing bit. You are, of course, a house-proud wife, and all your happy married life you have collected lovely things like gilded cherubs wearing wings and furniture by Chippendale bought at some famous auction sale. But your most special, valued treasure, the piece that gives you endless pleasure, is one small children's dining chair, Elizabethan, very rare. It is, in fact, your joy and pride passed down to you on Grandma's side. But Goldilocks, like many freaks, does not appreciate antiques. She doesn't care, she doesn't mind. And now she plonks her fat behind upon this dainty, precious chair, and crash! It busts, beyond repair. A nice girl would at once exclaim, "Oh dear, oh heavens, what a shame!" Not Goldie. She begins to swear. She bellows, "What a lousy chair!" and uses one disgusting word that luckily you've never heard. I dare not write it, even hint it. Nobody would ever print it. You'd think by now this little skunk would have the sense to do a bunk. But no, I very much regret she hasn't nearly finished yet. Deciding she would like a rest, she says, "Let's see which bed is best." Upstairs she goes and tries all 3. Here comes the next catastrophe. Most educated people choose to rid themselves of socks and shoes before they clamber into bed. But Goldie didn't give a shred. Her filthy shoes were thick with grime and mud and mush and slush and slime. Worse still, upon the heel of one was something that a dog had done. I say once more, what would you think if all this horrid dirt and stink was smeared upon your eiderdown by this revolting little clown? The famous story has no clues to show the girl removed her shoes. Oh, what a tale of crime on crime. Let's check it for a second time.
Crime 1, the prosecution's case. She breaks and enters someone's place. Crime 2, the prosecutor notes. She steals a bowl of porridge oats. Crime 3, she breaks a precious chair belonging to the baby bear. Crime 4, she smears each spotless sheet with filthy messes from her feet.
A judge would say without a blink,
10 years hard labour in the clink.
But in the book, as you will see, the little beast gets off scot-free, while tiny children near and far shout, "Goody good, hooray, hurrah! Poor darling Goldilocks," they say. "Thank goodness that she got away." Myself, I think I'd rather send young Goldie to a sticky end. "Oh, Daddy," cried the baby bear, "my porridge gone, it isn't fair."
Then go upstairs.
The big bear said.
Your porridge is upon the bed, but as it's inside Mademoiselle, you'll have to eat her up as well. Cinderella. I guess you think you know this story. You don't. The real one's much more gory. The phony one, the one you know, was cooked up years and years ago and made to sound all soft and sappy just to keep the children happy. Mind you, they got the first bit right, the bit where in the dead of night the ugly sisters, jewels and all, departed for the palace ball, while darling little Cinderella was locked up in a slimy cellar, where rats who wanted things to eat began to nibble at her feet. She bellowed,
"Help!
and
Let me out!"
the magic fairy heard her shout. Appearing in a blaze of light, she said,
"My dear, I'm all right."
All right?
cried Cindy.
Can't you see I feel as rotten as can be?
She beat her fist against the wall and shouted,
Get me to the ball! There is a disco at the palace. The rest have gone and I am jealous. I want a dress, I want a coach and earrings and a diamond brooch and silver slippers, 2 of those, and lovely nylon pantyhose. Done up like that, I'll guarantee the handsome prince will fall for me.
The fairy said.
Hang on a tick.
She gave her wand a mighty flick, and quickly, in no time at all, Cindy was at the palace ball. It made the ugly sisters wince to see her dancing with the prince. She held him very tight and pressed herself against his manly chest. The prince himself was turned to pulp. All he could do was gasp and gulp. Then midnight struck. She shouted,
Heck! I got to run to save my neck.
The prince cried, No, alas, alack! He grabbed her dress to hold her back. As Cindy shouted,
Let me go.
the dress was ripped from head to toe. She ran out in her underwear and lost one slipper on the stair. The prince was on it like a dart. He pressed it to his pounding heart. The girl this slipper fits, he cried. Tomorrow morn shall be my bride. I'll visit every house in town until I've tracked the maiden down. Then, rather carelessly, I fear, he placed it on a crate of beer. At once, one of the ugly sisters, the one whose face was blotched with blisters, sneaked up and grabbed the dainty shoe and quickly flushed it down the loo. Then, in its place, she calmly put the slipper from her own left foot. Aha, you see, the plot grows thicker and Cindy's luck starts looking sicker. Next day, the prince went charging down to knock on all the doors in town. In every house, the tension grew. Who was the owner of the shoe? The shoe was long and very wide. A normal foot got lost inside. Also, it smelled a wee bit icky. The owner's feet were hot and sticky. Thousands of eager people came to try it on, but all in vain. Now came the ugly sisters' go. One tried it on. The prince screamed, No! But she screamed, Yes, it fits, whoopee, so now you've got to marry me. The prince went white from ear to ear. He muttered, Let me out of here. Oh, no, you don't. You made a vow. There's no way you can back out now. Off with her head, the prince roared back. They chopped it off with one big whack. This pleased the prince. He smiled and said, She's prettier without her head. Then out came sister number 2, who yelled,
Now I will try the shoe.
Try this instead, the prince yelled back. He swung his trusty sword and smack, her head went crashing to the ground. It bounced a bit and rolled around. In the kitchen, peeling spuds, Cinderella heard the thuds of bouncing heads upon the floor and poked her own head round the door.
What's all the racket?
Cindy cried. Mind your own biz, the prince replied. Poor Cindy's heart was torn to shreds.
My prince,
She thought,
he chops off heads. How could I marry anyone who does that sort of thing for fun?
The prince cried, Who's this dirty slut? Off with her nut! Off with her nut! Just then, all in a blaze of light, the magic fairy hove in sight. Her magic wand went swoosh and swish.
Cindy!
She cried.
Come, make a wish. Wish anything and have no doubt that I will make it come about.
Cindy answered,
Oh, kind fairy, this time I shall be more wary. No more princes, no more money. I have had my taste of honey. I'm wishing for a decent man. They're hard to find. Do you think you can?
Within a minute, Cinderella was married to a lovely fella, a simple jam maker by trade, who sold good homemade marmalade. Their house was filled with smiles and laughter, and they were happy ever after.
The Magic Finger by Roald Dahl. The farm next to ours is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. The Greggs have 2 children, both of them boys. Their names are Philip and William. Sometimes I go over to their farm to play with them. I am a girl, and I am 8 years old. Philip is also 8 years old. William is 3 years older. He is 10. What? Oh, all right then. He is 11. Last week, something very funny happened to the Gregg family. I am going to tell you about it as best I can. Now, the one thing that Mr. Gregg and his 2 boys loved to do more than anything else was to go hunting. Every Saturday morning they would take their guns and go off into the woods to look for animals and birds to shoot. Even Philip, who was only 8 years old, had a gun of his own. I can't stand hunting. I just can't stand it. It doesn't seem right to me that men and boys should kill animals just for the fun they get out of it. So I used to try to stop Philip and William from doing it. Every time I went over to their farm, I would do my best to talk them out of it, but they only laughed at me. I even said something about it once to Mr. Gregg, but he just walked on past me as if I weren't there. Then, one Saturday morning, I saw Philip and William coming out of the woods with their father, and they were carrying a lovely young deer. This made me so cross that I started shouting at them. The boys laughed and made faces at me, and Mr. Gregg told me to go home and mind my own P's and Q's. Well, that did it. I saw red, and before I was able to stop myself, I did something I never meant to do. I put the magic finger on them all. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. I even put it on Mrs. Gregg, who wasn't there. I put it on the whole Gregg family. For months, I had been telling myself that I would never put the magic finger upon anyone again. Not after what happened to my teacher, old Mrs. Winter. Poor old Mrs. Winter. One day we were in class, and she was teaching us spelling. "Stand up," she said to me, "and spell cat." "That's an easy one," I said. "K-A-T." "You are a stupid little girl," Mrs. Winter said. "I am not a stupid little girl," I cried. "I am a very nice little girl." "Go and stand in the corner," Mrs. Winter said. Then I got cross, and I saw red, and I put the magic finger on Mrs. Winter good and strong, and almost at once, guess what? Whiskers began growing out of her face. They were long black whiskers, just like the ones you see on a cat, only much bigger, and how fast they grew. Before we had time to think, they were out to her ears. Of course, the whole class started screaming with laughter, and then Mrs. Winter said, "Will you be so kind as to tell me what you find so madly funny, all of you?" And when she turned around to write something on the blackboard, we saw that she had grown a tail as well. It was a huge, bushy tail. I can't begin to tell you what happened after that. But if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right again now, the answer is no, and she never will be. The magic finger is something I've been able to do all my life. I can't tell you just how I do it, because I don't even know myself. But it always happens when I get cross, when I see red. Then I get very, very hot all over. Then the tip of the forefinger of my right hand begins to tingle most terribly, and suddenly a sort of flash comes out of me, a quick flash like something electric. It jumps out and touches the person who has made me cross. And after that, the magic finger is upon him or her, and things begin to happen. Well, the magic finger was now upon the whole of the Gregg family, and there was no taking it off again. I ran home and waited for things to happen. They happened fast. I shall now tell you what those things were. I got the whole story from Philip and William the next morning after it was all over. In the afternoon of the very same day that I put the magic finger on the Gregg family, Mr. Gregg and Philip and William went out hunting once again. This time they were going after wild ducks, so they headed towards the lake. In the first hour, they got 10 birds. In the next hour, they got another 6. "What a day!" cried Mr. Gregg. "This is the best yet." He was beside himself with joy. Just then, 4 more wild ducks flew over their heads. They were flying very low. They were easy to hit. Bang, 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 went the guns. The ducks flew on. "We missed," said Mr. Gregg. "That's funny." Then, to everyone's surprise, the 4 ducks turned around and came flying right back to the guns. "Hey," said Mr. Gregg, "what on earth are they doing? They're really asking for it this time." He shot at them again. So did the boys. And again they all missed. Mr. Gregg got very red in the face. "It's the light. It's getting too dark to see. Let's go home." So they started for home, carrying with them the 16 birds they had shot before. But the 4 ducks would not leave them alone. They now began flying around and around the hunters as they walked away. Mr. Gregg didn't like it one bit. "Be off!" he cried, and he shot at them many more times, but it was no good. He simply could not hit them. All the way home, those 4 ducks flew around in the sky above their heads, and nothing would make them go away. Late that night, after Philip and William had gone to bed, Mr. Gregg went outside to get some wood for the fire. He was crossing the yard when all at once he heard the call of a wild duck in the sky. He stopped and looked up. The night was very still. There was a thin yellow moon over the trees on the hill, and the sky was filled with stars. Then Mr. Gregg heard the noise of wings flying low over his head, and he saw the 4 ducks, dark against the night sky, flying very close together. They were going around and around the house. Mr. Gregg forgot about the firewood and hurried back indoors. He was now quite afraid. He didn't like what was going on, but he said nothing about it to Mrs. Gregg. All he said was, "Come on, let's go to bed. I feel tired." So they went to bed and to sleep. When morning came, Mr. Gregg was the first to wake up. He opened his eyes. He was about to put out a hand for his watch to see the time, but his hand wouldn't come out. "That's funny. Where's my hand?" He lay still, wondering what was up. Maybe he had hurt his hand in some way. He tried the other hand. That wouldn't come out either. He sat up. Then, for the first time, he saw what he looked like. He gave a yell and jumped out of bed. Mrs. Gregg woke up, and when she saw Mr. Gregg standing there on the floor, she gave a yell too, for he was now a tiny little man. He was maybe as tall as the seat of a chair, but no taller. And where his arms had been, he had a pair of duck's wings instead. But, cried Mrs. Gregg, going purple in the face. "My dear man, what's happened to you?" "What's happened to both of us, you mean?" shouted Mr. Gregg. It was now Mrs. Gregg's turn to jump out of bed. She ran to look at herself in the glass, but she was not tall enough to see into it. She was even smaller than Mr. Gregg, and she too had got wings instead of arms. "Oh, oh, oh, oh," sobbed Mrs. Gregg. "This must be witches' work," cried Mr. Gregg. And both of them started running around the room, flapping their wings. A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had wings and no arms, and they were really tiny. They were about as big as robins. "Mamma, Mamma, Mamma," chirruped Philip. "Look, Mamma, we can fly." And they flew up into the air. "Come down at once," said Mrs. Gregg. "You're much too high." But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out of the window. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg ran to the window and looked out. The two boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Gregg said to Mr. Gregg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Gregg said. "Come on, let's try." Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Gregg. "Don't be afraid." So out of the window they flew far up into the sky, and it didn't take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird." "Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. "Not at all. I could go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Somebody is walking in our garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms like men instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Greggs' house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high in the air. "Stop!" called the tiny Mr. Gregg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away! This is my house!" The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out a hand and opened the door of the house and went in. The others went in after him. The door shut. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Gregg began to cry. "Oh dear, oh dear, they've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We will be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then, it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we are going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Gregg looked at them and smiled. "We are going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it. We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They all flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Gregg chose the place for the nest. "Now we want sticks, lots and lots of little sticks. Off you go, all of you, and find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off. Soon they were back, carrying sticks in their mouths. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build the nest. "More! I want more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while he said, "That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. "I feel I might lay an egg any moment." The others all got in beside her. "How warm it is," said William. "And what fun to be living so high up," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "But what about food?" said Mrs. Gregg. We haven't had a thing to eat all day." "That's right. So we will now fly back to the house and go in by an open window and get the tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." "Oh, we'll be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Gregg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got to the house, they found all the windows and doors closed. There was no way in. "Just look at that beastly duck cooking at my stove," cried Mrs. Gregg as she flew past the kitchen window. "How dare she?" "And look at that one holding my lovely gun," shouted Mr. Gregg. "One of them is lying in my bed," yelled William, looking into a top window. "And one of them is playing with my electric train," cried Philip. "Oh dear, said Mrs. Gregg. "They've taken over our whole house. We shall never get it back, and what are we going to eat?" "I will not eat worms," said Philip. "I would rather die." "Or slugs," said William. Mrs. Gregg took the two boys under her wings and hugged them. "Don't worry. I can mince it all up very fine and you won't even know the difference. Lovely slug burgers, delicious worm burgers." No," cried William. "Never," said Philip. "Disgusting," said Mr. Gregg. "Just because we have wings, we don't have to eat bird food. We shall eat apples instead. Our trees are full of them. Come on." So they flew off to an apple tree. But to eat an apple without holding it in your hands is not at all easy. Every time you try to get your teeth into it, it just pushes away. In the end, they were able to get a few small bites each. And then it began to get dark. So they all flew back to the nest and lay down to sleep. It must have been about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if the family was all right. "Hello," I said. Said a voice at the other end. "Who is it?" I asked. "Philip, is that you?" "Oh, stop it," I said. Then there came a very funny noise. It was like a bird laughing. I put down the telephone quickly. "Oh, that magic finger! What has it done to my friends?" That night, while Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William were trying to get some sleep up in the high nest, a great wind began to blow. The tree rocked from side to side, and everyone, even Mr. Gregg, was afraid that the nest would fall down. Then came the rain. It rained and rained, and the water ran into the nest, and they all got as wet as could be, and oh, it was a bad, bad night. At last the morning came, and with it the warm sun. "Well," said Mrs. Gregg, "thank goodness that's over. I never want to sleep in a nest again." She got up and looked over the side. "Help!" she cried. Look down there." "What is it, my love?" said Mr. Gregg. He stood up and peeped over the side. He got the surprise of his life. On the ground below them stood the 4 enormous ducks, as tall as men, and 3 of them were holding guns in their hands. One had Mr. Gregg's gun, one had Philip's gun, and one had William's gun. The guns were all pointing right up at the nest. No, called out Mr. and Mrs. Gregg both together. Don't shoot! Please don't shoot!
"Why not?"
said one of the ducks. It was the one who wasn't holding a gun.
"You are always shooting at us."
"Oh, but that's not the same. We are allowed to shoot ducks."
"Who allows you?"
asked the duck. "Well, we allow each other," said Mr. Gregg.
"Very nice,"
said the duck.
"And now we are going to allow each other to shoot you."
I would love to have seen Mr. Gregg's face just then. "Oh, please," cried Mrs. Gregg. "My 2 little children are up here with us. You wouldn't shoot my children."
"Yesterday you shot my children. You shot all 6. loss of my children.
I'll never do it again, cried Mr. Gregg. Never, never, never.
Do you really mean that?
Asked the duck. I do mean it. I'll never shoot another duck as long as I live.
That is not good enough. What about deer?
Oh, I'll do anything you say if you'll only put down those guns. I'll never shoot another duck or another deer or anything else again.
Will you give me your word on that?
Said the duck. I will, said Mr. Gregg.
Will you throw away your guns?
Asked the duck. I will break them into tiny bits and never again need you be afraid of me or my family.
Very well. You may now come down. And by the way, may I congratulate you on the nest? For a first effort, it's pretty good.
Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William hopped out of the nest and flew down. Then all at once, everything went black before their eyes and they couldn't see. At the same time, a funny feeling came over them all, and they heard a great wind blowing in their ears. Then the black that was before their eyes turned to blue, to green, to red, and then to gold, and suddenly there they were, standing in lovely bright sunshine in their own garden, near their own house. And everything was back to normal once again. Our wings have gone, cried Mr. Gregg, and our arms have come back. And, we're not tiny anymore, laughed Mrs. Gregg. Oh, I'm so glad. Philip and William began dancing about with joy. Then, high above their heads, they heard the call of a wild duck. They all looked up, and they saw the 4 birds, lovely against the blue sky, flying very close together, heading back towards the lake in the woods. It must have been about half an hour later that I myself walked into the Greggs' garden. I had come to see how things were going, and I must admit I was expecting the worst. At the gate, I stopped and stared. It was a queer sight. In one corner, Mr. Gregg was smashing all the guns into tiny pieces with a huge hammer. In another corner, Mrs. Gregg was placing beautiful flowers upon 16 tiny mounds of soil, which I learned later were the graves of the ducks that had been shot the day before. And in the middle of the yard stood Philip and William with a sack of their father's best barley beside them. They were surrounded by ducks, doves, pigeons, sparrows, robins and larks and many other kinds that I didn't know, and the birds were eating the barley that the boys were scattering by the handful. Good morning, Mr. Gregg, I said. Mr. Gregg lowered his hammer and looked at me. My name is not Gregg any more, he said. In honor of my feathered friends, I have changed it from Gregg to Egg. And I am Mrs. Egg, said Mrs. Gregg. What happened? I asked. They seemed to have gone completely dotty, all 4 of them. Philip and William then began to tell me the whole story. When they had finished, William said, Look, there's the nest. Can you see it? Right up in the top of the tree. That's where we all slept last night. I built it all myself, said Mr. Egg proudly. Every stick of it. If you don't believe us, Mrs. Egg said, just go into the house and take a look at the bathroom. It's a mess. They filled the tub right up to the brim, Philip said. They must have been swimming around in it all night, and feathers everywhere. Ducks like water, Mr. Egg said. I'm glad they had a good time. Just then, from somewhere over by the lake, there came a loud bang. Someone's shooting, I cried. That'll be Jim Cooper, Mr. Egg said. Him and his 3 boys, they're shooting mad. Those Coopers are the whole family. Suddenly, I started to see red. Then I got very hot all over. Then the tip of my finger began tingling most terribly. I could feel the power building up and up inside me. I turned and started running towards the lake as fast as I could. Hey! Shouted Mr. Egg. What's up? Where are you going? To find the Coopers, I called back. But why? You wait and see. They'll be nesting in the trees tonight, every one of them.
Roald Dahl's Dirty Beasts.
The Pig. In England once there lived a big and wonderfully clever pig. To everybody it was plain that Piggy had a massive brain. He worked out sums inside his head. There was no book he hadn't read. He knew what made an airplane fly. He knew how engines worked and why. He knew all this. But in the end, one question drove him round the bend. He simply couldn't puzzle out what life was really all about. What was the reason for his birth? Why was he placed upon this earth? His giant brain went round and round. Alas, no answer could be found, till suddenly one wondrous night, all in a flash he saw the light. He jumped up like a ballet dancer and yelled, "By gum, I've got the answer. They want my bacon slice by slice to sell at a tremendous price. They want my tender, juicy chops to put in all the butchers' shops. They want my pork to make a roast, and that's the part'll cost the most. They want my sausages in strings. They even want my chitterlings. The butcher's shop, the carving knife, that is the reason for my life." Such thoughts as these are not designed to give a pig great peace of mind. Next morning in comes Farmer Bland, a pail of pig swill in his hand, and Piggy with a mighty roar bashes the farmer to the floor. Now comes the rather grisly bit, so let's not make too much of it, except that you must understand that Piggy did eat Farmer Bland. He ate him up from head to toe, chewing the pieces nice and slow. It took an hour to reach the feet, because there was so much to eat. And when he'd finished, Pig, of course, felt absolutely no remorse. Slowly he scratched his brainy head, and with a little smile he said, "I had a fairly powerful hunch that he might have me for his lunch, and so, because I feared the worst, I thought I'd better eat him first."
The Lion. The lion just adores to eat a lot of red and tender meat. And if you ask the lion what is much the tenderest of the lot, he will not say a roast of lamb, or curried beef, or devilled ham, or crispy pork, or corned beef hash, or sausages, or mutton mash. Then could it be a big plump hen? He answers no. What is it then? "Oh, lion dear, could I not make you happy with a lovely steak? Could I entice you from your lair with rabbit pie or roasted hare?" The lion smiled and shook his head. He came up very close and said, "The meat I am about to chew is neither steak nor chops. It's you."
The Scorpion. You ought to thank your lucky star that here in England, where you are, you'll never find, or so it's said, a scorpion inside your bed. The scorpion's name is Sting-a-ling, a most repulsive, ugly thing, and I would never recommend that you should treat him as a friend. His scaly skin is black as black, with armour plate upon his back. Observe his scowling, murderous face, his wicked eyes, his lack of grace. Note well his long and crinkly tail, and when it starts to swish and flail, oh gosh, watch out, jump back, I say, and run till you're a mile away. The moment that his tail goes swish, he has but one determined wish. He wants to make a sudden jump and sting you hard upon your rump. What is the matter, darling child? Why do you look so tense and wild?
Oh, Mummy, underneath the sheet, there's something moving on my feet. Some horrid, creepy, crawly thing. Do you think it could be Sting-a-ling?
What nonsense, child, you're teasing me.
I'm not. It's reached my knee. It's going up my thigh. Oh, Mummy, catch it quickly, try. It's on my bottom now. It's, ow, 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 ow.
The Anteater. Some wealthy folks from USA who lived near San Francisco Bay possessed an only child called Roy, a plump and unattractive boy, half-baked, half-witted, and half-boiled, but worst of all, most dreadfully spoiled. Whatever Roy desired each day, his father bought him right away. Toy motor cars, electric trains, the latest model aeroplanes, a colour television set, a saxophone, a clarinet, expensive teddy bears that talked, and animals that walked and squawked. That house contained sufficient toys to thrill 500,000 boys. As well as this, young Roy would choose 2 pairs a week of brand new shoes. And now he stood there shouting, "What on earth is there I haven't got? How hard to think of something new. The choices are extremely few." Then added as he scratched his ear, "Hold it, I got a good idea. I think the next thing I must get should be a most peculiar pet, the kind that no one else has got. A giant anteater, why not?" As soon as Father heard the news, he quickly wrote to all the zoos. "Dear sirs," he said, "my dear keepers, do any of you have anteaters?" They answered by return of mail, "Our anteaters are not for sale." Undaunted, Roy's fond parent hurled more messages across the world. He said, "I'll pay you through the nose if you can get me one of those." At last he found an Indian gent. He lived near Delhi in a tent, who said that he would sacrifice his pet for an enormous price. The price demanded, if you please, was 50,000 gold rupees. The anteater arrived half dead. It looked at Roy and softly said, "I'm famished. Do you think you could please give me just a little food? A crust of bread, a bit of meat. I haven't had a thing to eat in all the time I was at sea, for nobody looked after me." Roy shouted, No bread or meat. Go find some ants. They're what you eat." The starving creature crawled away. It searched the garden night and day. It hunted every inch of ground, but not one single ant it found. "Please give me food," the creature cried. "Go find an ant," the boy replied. By chance, upon that very day, Roy's father's sister came to stay, a foul old hag of 83, whose name, it seems, was Dorothy. She said to Roy, "Come, let us sit out in the sun and talk a bit." Roy said, "I don't believe you've met my new and most unusual pet." He pointed down among the stones, where something lay all skin and bones. "Anteater," he yelled. "Don't lie there yawning. This is my aunt. Come say good morning." Some people in the USA have trouble with the words they say. However hard they try, they can't pronounce a simple word, like aunt. Instead of aunt, they call it ant. Instead of can't, they call it can't. Roy yelled, "Come here, you so-and-so. My aunt would like to say hello." Slowly the creature raised its head. "Do you mean that that's an ant?" it said. "Of course," cried Roy. "Aunt Dorothy. This ant is over 83. The creature smiled. Its tummy rumbled. It licked its starving lips and mumbled, "A giant ant? By gosh, a winner. At last I'll get a decent dinner. No matter if it's 83. If that's an ant, then it's for me." Then, taking very careful aim, it pounced upon the startled dame. It grabbed her firmly by the hair and ate her up right then and there, murmuring as it chewed the feet, "The largest ant I'll ever eat." Meanwhile, our hero Roy had sped in terror to the potting shed and tried to make himself obscure behind a pile of horse manure. But Anteater came sneaking in. Already it was much less thin, and said to Roy, "You little squirt, I think I'll have you for dessert."
The Porcupine. Each Saturday I shout hooray, for that's my pocket money day, although it's clearly understood I only get it when I'm good. This week my parents had been told that I had been as good as gold, so after breakfast 50p my generous father gave to me. Like lightning down the road I ran until I reached the sweet shop man, and bought the chocolates of my dreams, a great big bag of raspberry creams. There is a secret place I know where I quite often like to go, beyond the wood, behind some rocks, a super place for guzzling chocks. When I arrived, I quickly found a comfy-looking little mound, quite clean and round and earthy brown, just right, I thought, for sitting down. Here I will sit all morning long and eat until my chocks are gone. I sat. I screamed. I jumped a foot. Would you believe that I had put that tender little rump of mine upon a giant porcupine? My backside seemed to catch on fire. 100 red-hot bits of wire, 100 prickles sticking in and puncturing my precious skin. I ran for home. I shouted, "Mum, behold the prickles in my bum!" My mum, who always keeps her head, bent down to look, and then she said, "I personally am not about to try to pull those prickles out. I think a job like this requires the services of Mr. Myers." I shouted, "Not the dentist, no! Oh, Mum, why don't you have a go?" I begged her twice, I begged her thrice, but grown-ups never take advice. She said, "A dentist's very strong, he pulls things out the whole day long." She drove me quickly into town, and then they turned me upside down upon the awful dentist's chair, while 2 strong nurses held me there. Enter the dreaded Mr. Myers, waving a massive pair of pliers. "This is," he cried with obvious glee, "a new experience for me. Quite honestly, I can't pretend I've ever pulled things from this end." He started pulling one by one and yelling, "My, oh my, what fun!" I shouted, "Help!" I shouted, "Ow!" He said, "It's nearly over now. For heaven's sake, don't squirm about. Here goes. The last one's coming out." The dentist pulled, and out it came. And then I heard the man exclaim, "Let us now talk about the fees. That will be 50 guineas, please." My mother is a gutsy bird, and never one to mince a word. She cried, "By gosh, that's jolly steep." He answered, "No, it's very cheap. My dear woman, can't you see that if it hadn't been for me, this child could go another year with prickles sticking in her rear?" So that was that. Oh, what a day, and what a fuss. But by the way, I think I know why porcupines surround themselves with prickly spines. It is to stop some silly clown from squashing them by sitting down. Don't copy me. Don't be a twit. Be sure you look before you sit. The Cow. Please listen while I tell you now about a most fantastic cow. Miss Milky Daisy was her name, And when, aged 7 months, she came to live with us, she did her best to look the same as all the rest. But Daisy, as we all could see, had some kind of deformity, a funny sort of bumpy lump on either side above the rump. Now, not so very long ago, these bumpy lumps began to grow, and 3 or maybe 4 months later, I stood there an enthralled spectator. These bumpy lumps burst wide apart, and out there came, I cross my heart, of all the wondrous, marvellous things, a pair of gold and silver wings. A cow with wings, a flying cow. I'd never seen one up to now. Oh, Daisy, dear, can this be true? She flapped her wings, and up she flew. Most gracefully she climbed up high. She fairly whizzed across the sky. You should have seen her dive and swoop. She even did a loop-the-loop. Of course, almost immediately her picture was on live TV, and millions came each day to stare at Milky Daisy in the air. They shouted, "Jeepers, creepers, wow! It really is a flying cow." They laughed and clapped and cheered and waved, and all of them were well behaved, except for one quite horrid man who'd travelled from Afghanistan. This fellow, standing in the crowd, raised up his voice and yelled aloud, "That silly cow! Hey, listen, Daisy, I think you're absolutely crazy." Unfortunately, Daisy heard quite clearly every single word. "By gosh," she cried, "what awful cheek! Who is this silly foreign freak?" She dived, and using all her power, she got to 60 miles an hour. "Bomb's gone!" she cried. "Take that!" she said, and dropped a cowpat on his head.
The Crocodile. No animal is half so vile as Crocky-Walk the crocodile. On Saturdays he likes to crunch 6 juicy children for his lunch, and he especially enjoys just 3 of each, 3 girls, 3 boys. He smears the boys, to make them hot, with mustard from the mustard pot, but mustard doesn't go with girls. It tastes all wrong with plaits and curls. With them, what goes extremely well is butterscotch and caramel. It's such a super marvellous treat when boys are hot and girls are sweet. At least that's Crocky's point of view. He ought to know. He's had a few. That's all for now. It's time for bed. Lie down and rest your sleepy head. Shh! Listen. What is that I hear? Galumphing softly up the stair. Go lock the door and fetch my gun. Go on, child, hurry, quickly run. No, stop, stand back, he's coming in. Oh, look, that greasy, greenish skin, the shining teeth, the greedy smile. It's Crocky-Walk the crocodile.
The Tummy Beast.
One afternoon I said to Mummy, "Who is this person in my tummy? He must be small and very thin, or how could he have gotten in?" My mother said from where she sat, "It isn't nice to talk like that." "It's true," I cried. "I swear it, Mummy. There is a person in my tummy. He talks to me at night in bed. He's always asking to be fed. Throughout the day he screams at me, demanding sugar buns for tea. He tells me it is not a sin to go and raid the biscuit tin. I know quite well it's awfully wrong to guzzle food the whole day long, but really I can't help it, Mummy, not with this person in my tummy." "You horrid child," my mother cried. "Admit it right away, you've lied. You're simply trying to produce a silly, asinine excuse. You are the greedy, guzzling brat, and that is why you're always fat." I tried once more. "Believe me, Mummy, there is a person in my tummy." "I've had enough," my mother said. "You'd better go at once to bed." Just then, a nicely timed event delivered me from punishment. Deep in my tummy, something stirred, and then an awful noise was heard.
a snorting, grumbling, grunting sound that made my tummy jump around. My darling mother nearly died. "My goodness, what was that?" she cried. At once the tummy voice came through. It shouted,
"Hey there, listen you. I'm getting hungry. I want eats. I want lots of chocks and sweets. Get me half a pound of nuts. Look snappy or I'll twist your guts."
"That's him," I cried. "He's in my tummy. So now do you believe me, Mummy?"
But Mummy answered nothing more, for she had fainted on the floor.
The Toad and the Snail. I really am most awfully fond of playing in the lily pond. I take off shoes and socks and coat and paddle with my little boat. Now, yesterday, quite suddenly, a giant toad came up to me. This toad was easily as big as any fair-sized fattish pig. He smiled and said, "How do you do? Hello, good morning, how are you?" His face somehow reminded me of Mummy's sister Emily. The toad said, "Don't you think I'm fine? Admire these lovely legs of mine, and I am sure you've never seen a toad so gloriously green." I said, "So far as I can see, you look just like Aunt Emily." He said, "I bet Aunt Emily can't jump one half as high as me. Hop on my back, young friend," he cried. "I'll take you for a marvellous ride." As I got on, I thought, "Oh, blimey, oh, dearie me, how wet and slimy." "Sit further back," he said. "That's right. I'm going to jump, so hold on tight." He jumped. Oh, how he jumped. By gum, I thought my final hour had come. My wretched eardrums popped and fizzed. My eyeballs watered. Up we whizzed. I clung on tight. I shouted, "How much further are we going now?" Toad said, his face all wreathed in smiles, "With every jump, it's 50 miles. Quite literally, we jumped all over from Scotland to the cliffs of Dover. Above the cliffs we stopped for tea, and Toad said, gazing at the sea, "What do you say we take a chance and jump from England into France?" I said, "Oh dear, do you think we oughta? I'd hate to finish in the water." But toads, you'll find, don't give a wink for what we little children think. He didn't bother to reply. He jumped. You should have seen us fly. We simply soared across the sea, the marvellous Mr. Toad and me. Then down we came, and down, and landed in a funny town. We landed hard, in fact we bounced. "We're there, it's France," the Toad announced. He said, "You must admit it's grand to jump into a foreign land. No boats, no bicycles, no trains, no cars, no noisy aeroplanes." Just then we heard a fearful shout. "Oh, heavens above," the Toad cried out. I turned and saw a frightening sight. On every side, to left, to right, people were running down the road, running at me and Mr. Toad. And every person, man and wife, was brandishing a carving knife. It didn't take me very long to figure there was something wrong. And yet how could a small boy know, for nobody had told me so, that Frenchmen aren't like you or me. They do things very differently. They won't say yards, they call them meters. And they're the most peculiar eaters. A Frenchman frequently regales himself with half a dozen snails. The greedy ones will gulp a score of these foul brutes and ask for more. In many of the best hotels, the people also eat the shells. Imagine that. My stomach turns. One might as well eat slugs or worms. But wait. Read on a little bit. You haven't heard the half of it. These French go even more agog if someone offers them a frog. You'd better fetch a basin quick in case you're going to be sick. The bits of frog they like to eat are thighs and calves and toes and feet. The French will gobble loads and loads of legs they chop off frogs and toads. They think it's absolutely ripping to guzzle frogs' legs fried in dripping. That's why the whole town and their wives were rushing us with carving knives. They screamed in French, "Well, I'll be blowed. What legs there are upon that toad. Chop them, skin them, cook them, fry them. All of us are going to try them." "Toad," I cried, "I'm not a funk, but ought we not to do a bunk? These rascals haven't come to greet you. All they want to do is eat you." Toad turned his head and looked at me and said, as cool could be, "Calm down and listen carefully, please. I often come to France to tease these crazy French who long to eat my lovely tender froggy meat. I am a magic toad," he cried, "and I don't ever have to hide. Stay where you are, don't move," he said, and pressed a button on his head. At once there came a blinding flash, and then the most almighty crash, and sparks were bursting all around, and smoke was rising from the ground. When all the smoke had cleared away, the Frenchmen with their knives cried, "Hey, where is the toad? Where has he gone?" You see, I now was sitting on a wonderfully enormous snail. His shell was smooth and brown and pale, and I was so high off the ground that I could see for miles around. The snail said, "Hello, greetings, hail, I was a toad, now I'm a snail." I had to change the way I looked to save myself from being cooked. "Oh, snail," I said, "I'm not so sure. I think they're starting up once more." The French were shouting, "What a snail! Oh, what a monster! What a whale! He makes the toad look teachy small. There's lovely snail meat for us all. We'll bake the creature in his shell and ring aloud the dinner bell. Get garlic, parsley, butter, spices. We'll cut him into 50 slices. Come sharpen up your carving knives. This is the banquet of our lives." I murmured through my quivering lips, "Oh, snail, I think we've had our chips." The snail replied, "I disagree. These greedy French, they'll not eat me." But on they came. They screamed, "Yahoo! Surround the brute and run him through!" Good gracious, I could almost feel the pointed blades, the shining steel. But Snail was cool as cool could be. He turned his head and winked at me and murmured, "Au revoir, farewell," and pulled a lever on his shell. I looked around. The snail had gone. And now who was I sitting on? Oh, what relief, what joy, because at last I'd found a friend. It was the gorgeous, glamorous, absurd, enchanting roly-poly bird. He turned and whispered in my ear, "Well, fancy seeing you, my dear." Then up he went in glorious flight. I clutched his neck and hung on tight. We fairly raced across the sky, the roly-poly bird and I, and landed safely just beyond the fringes of the lily pond. When I got home, I never told a solitary single soul what I had done or where I'd been or any of the things I'd seen. I did not even say I rode upon a giant jumping toad, because if I had, I knew that they would not believe me anyway. But you and I know well it's true. We know I jumped. We know I flew. We're sure it all took place, although not one of us will ever know. We'll never, never understand why children go to Wonderland.